Esatto. Yes. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the town of Ajax's third annual diversity conference. Some of you might have been around for the first one. So here we are at the third diversity conference. This morning, we're joined by over 170 guests. Amongst us are principals, executive directors, teachers, students, officers from Durham Regional Police, business owners. Regardless of your affiliation or professional designation, today we're here to embrace the different dimensions of diversity in our community and to find innovative ways to engage our community. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to introduce and welcome Tsimshian Elder Shannon Thunderbird to recognize our Indigenous people and acknowledge the land. Thank you.
Oh boy, I can do this. First thing that goes when you're older, your knees. Just putting that out there. Taxdigi aklamzax kendalagut. Dalamut nado unigake. Taxdigi at al sagale dul stipniat nagake to gut. Kendalagudu to quasim. In English, may all who entered rest in peace and safety beneath my wings. May all who leave take with you wings of comfort. My heart is at peace with you all. First things first, we recognize and acknowledge the Indigenous land and territory on which today's event is taking place. When you acknowledge traditional territory, I'm always a bit nervous about the word traditional, but we'll talk about that later. It's an invitation to reflect on personal relationships with Indigenous nations. When we acknowledge treaty, we are asking individuals to explore their rights and responsibilities and to accept the treaty as fact. When land is acknowledged, we are encouraging you to seek out the history and teachings of Canada's First People and of the natural world. Today, we acknowledge the land of the Anishinaabe Mississauga, adjacent to the Mississaugas of Scugog. And the territory covers the Williams Treaty. I say Chi-miigwech in their language, thank you. This place is and will continue to be home to Indigenous people. And we need to move forward together with kindness, respect, and honor. A long time ago, when the mountains grew tall and put on their dignity, they thought they were people. A long, long time ago, when the animals ran in the forests and the birds flew up in the sky and the swimmers swam in the oceans, they thought they were people. So very long ago, trees, plants, and all green things thought they were people. And last but not least, there were women and there were men, and they thought they were people. Such a long time ago. That is a Tsimshian story, the short version. The other one's 4 days long. Like, you didn't want to hear that one? Okay, that's your 10-second version. But it speaks of the equality of all living things. It's to remind us as humans that we were here last. It's a bit humbling when you think about that. We were here last. Should we speak the language of unity? Should we speak the words of love? Should we sing the songs of all the people? Should we dance the rhythm of the dove? Indigenous knowledge is as relevant today as it was in the time of my ancestors. Excuse me. We have generational blueprints for human behavior through the medicine wheel, among other things. They connect us to the teachers of the natural and supernatural worlds, celestial beings, plants, animals, earth, air, fire, and water. These are respected equals in my world. In other words, their unique traits provide models for living in a good way, as the old people say. There are lessons to be learned from both the supernatural and the secular worlds, and they are passed down from generation to generation through songs, ceremonies, stories. My ancestors, well, they lived lives of dignity and integrity. Most tribes did not engage in sordid behavior. That comes out of the old John Ford Westerns. We did not subjugate our people, especially women, or engage in ethnic cleansing. Instead, our lives had deep meaning that held at the center an enduring heritage of respect, equality, connectivity to all forms of life. In other words, our world was a holistic totality. We lived by the dictate, begin in a good way as you mean to carry on. We demonstrated by our behavior in a circular-based society the power of right action and its components that included clarity, objectivity, discernment, love, and laughter. When you're me, you gotta find the world funny. We knew we were more than the sum of our physical parts or our tribal names, and we accepted without limits or conditions our role as Mother Earth's caretakers. And we have never forgotten that our lives depended on the judicious care of the land. For a long period, even after European contact, we continued to be guided by our ancestors and all that was greater than us. To honor our heritage, walk proudly with flexibility and fluidity in the presence of others. We paid attention to what had true meaning because we knew that it was the heart that held our memories. When we extend arms of love inward to ourselves and outward to all of you, we hold a balanced view of the power of health, wellness, and harmony, don't you think? Just out there. I take my presentations all over Ontario school boards, Eastern Canada. I travel, my last name is Thunderbird, by the way, and I wasn't named after a car. One of my favorite questions from a child in grade 4, were you named after a car? And I said, could we go with the idea that my people were here first and the car was named after me? Bump, bump, you know, so. Anyway, because I travel so much, I am doomed to drive a minivan for the rest of my days. But as I take my presentations to schools everywhere, I ask the children and the youth to pay attention to the knowledge held by Canada's first people, particularly from pre-Confederation times. As noted earlier, what we know is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Indigenous wisdom resonates with the seeking mind of all intelligent humans, particularly in these very, very unsettled times. Haida Laxadil Nu Halensox, Daxgao, Cam, Luktaba, Dipniet Buiska Cam, Asni Taxel M2. in English. Mother Earth and Father Sky hold us between them. They expect us to be worthy of it. Are we? That's the question. I want you to have a really wonderful day and seek out people you don't know and make a peaceful connection. Note, you're all sitting in circles. Love it, love it, love it. I come from a circular-based society, and when you are in a circle, everybody is equal. It's only in rows that you're not. And you note that when we stand and talk to one another, you automatically move into a circle. Because if you're in a row, it's really hard to go, and what was he saying? You know, it just doesn't work. I've often thought that rows were for linear thinkers, and circles are for all those who cherish inspiration and dreams and honor, respect, integrity, and listening, 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 and not waiting to speak. We were just talking about that at the table, about silence. We're not allowed to have silence in our world because we have to fill it with something. So listen today, and listen to each other. Will Wileska, all my relations, Nisabat, it is finished. Toyach, thank you. All right, here is the First Nations. Try this, okay? All right, this was taught to me by a 6'5" Mohawk. He came to me one day and said, I really like your teachings, ma'am. You know you're old when they call you ma'am. And so he went, 1, 2, this is the forearm, you smack it. So try that. 1, 2, somebody beside you. Boom. Thank you.
Shannon, miigwech very much for coming and sharing your teachings with us today. We're so glad that you were able to be here with us. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 3rd Annual Diversity Conference here in Ajax. My name is Robert Gruber. I'm the Manager of Community and Cultural Development with Recreation, Culture, and Community Development, as well as Acting Director. Unfortunately, Tracy Vaughn is off for a little bit, and she wishes she could be here with you today because this is one of her favorite events during the year. Who is here for the first time? How many people here have been here twice? And how many people here have been here all 3 years? Give yourselves a pat on the back, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Earlier this week, I was in Mississauga, and I was attending the Creative Cities Network of Canada conference. And I had the privilege of attending a session that was led by an elder and a knowledge keeper from the Bear Clan. And one of the first things that he said to our group was, "Is it okay to think differently?" And he challenged everybody on that question. And we all looked at each other and said, of course, absolutely, it's okay to think differently. So I ask you that question, is it okay to think differently today? Absolutely. And you know, as long as we can do this with mutual respect, we can have a great day today in terms of learning, sharing, understanding, and mutual respect. And I think we're gonna have a great day if we can do that. Our diversity conference aims to provide an environment of shared learning, and we look forward to being your host today. Your participation, ideas, and feedback are central to the continued development of our conference. While dialogue, questions, and comments are welcome, we also want to ensure that all of our participants and our presenters feel welcome and included in the discussion. So therefore, I'm asking you today to make sure that you are respectful and refrain from comments which contain profanity or discrimination on the basis of race, origin, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, gender identity and expression, or sexual orientation, as well as personal attacks or defamatory statements or insensitive comments, and any other message that does not contribute meaningfully to our conversation. Because we are all here to learn, we're all here to understand, because it's not about you, it's not about you, it's not about individual groups, it's about all of us. And as Shannon said, we are in some troubling times, and we want to make sure that everyone's here so that we can have a conversation. I'm so proud to be part of a town that looks at doing something like this. We started a speaker series earlier this year, and again, that is another forum for people to get together, come and have a conversation, because that's what it's all about. It's about relationship building, looking each other in the eye, and having that meaningful conversation. So are we ready to have a great day today? Yes? Good. It is now my privilege to introduce and welcome our Mayor-elect, Sean Collier, who is here to bring greetings on behalf of the town of Ajax. Thanks, Sean.
Try and get through this without my glasses. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, as Jay said, to our third annual diversity conference. I'm also very proud to be part of an organization that is so forward-thinking as the town of Ajax, and glad to be here today. Thrilled also to see so many interested and engaged people in the room. I think it really speaks volumes about Ajax and our community, and I'm looking forward to the insights and conversations coming from today's sessions. Just like to take a quick moment to recognize some of my council colleagues and some other individuals here today. We have our Regional Councillor-elect, Joanne Dyes, in the front row. Regional Councillor-elect Sterling Lee is in the back there. I have Marilyn Crawford on my list, but I didn't see her come in. But if Marilyn is here, Regional Councillor-elect Marilyn Crawford. Local Councillor-elect Lisa Bauer for Ward 3. And I know Rob Tyler Moran was on the list. I didn't see him come in, but if you're here, local council Rob Tyler Moran. We also have our new CAO, Shane Baker, is with us today. And joining the conference later this afternoon to provide closing remarks will be Honourable Rod Phillips, Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and our local MPP. So stay tuned for Rod this afternoon. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the more than 55 staff from local, frontline, and regional agencies. I saw Jeff Haskins here from Durham Regional Police Services, as well as organizations from outside of Durham. All of these organizations carry institutional memory and credibility on the ground. The work you do in your respective sectors is vital to our residents, and we're excited to have you here, so thank you very much for coming. In Ajax, we're very proud to be the most diverse municipality in the region of Durham. We have over a 56% racialized population, and the town has a higher rate of diversity than the City of Toronto. You'll hear more about the demographic makeup of Ajax from today's keynote speaker. This distinction is one of the many reasons that council and staff take our commitment to diversity and inclusion so seriously here in Ajax. It's important for us as a town to build an understanding with all residents and groups, to recognize their contributions to Ajax, and celebrate their history and ancestry, including, of course, our Indigenous people. Today, we're engaging about timely issues that matter to residents and those who serve them, as we make space for exploration and conversation, embracing the diverse communities and experience that make Ajax unique. Thank you, everyone, for coming today, and I hope you have an excellent day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor-elect Sean Collier. Our next guest is a poet, a womanist, and the founder of Our Women's Voice. Please join me in welcoming the voice of Kiosha Love.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Kiosha Love. I'm a poet, artist, educator, and psych student. Pronouns are she and her. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge, could all the Black people put their hand up? Thank you, I love doing that. I see you. I see the non-Black people too, but just felt like it was important to, in many different spaces like conferences, it's usually male-dominated or white-dominated, and I feel like it's important, instead of feeling like Black people are always watched, it's better to reverse and be like, I see you. So I always like to do that. And before I continue to read my poems, I kind of want to address where my poems come from, and that's my identity. Growing up a Black woman was really challenging for me, still is challenging for me, and the way I unpack that trauma, the way I unpack my identity and who I am is through poetry. So I just want to challenge you each today, as you hear my words, to challenge your discomfort, to have an open mind, and I hope you enjoy. And if you like something or you enjoy something that I said, snap, that's really great in the poetry community, snap if you like something, and yeah, just enjoy. Women, soft, tender, and emotional, you know how they are. So fragile and delicate, bullshit. Women are really not to be messed with, but we've been a convenience, a prize, run over like objects for centuries. And I've always had to apologize if I ever came off as angry, but this time, I'm not so apologetic. I could care less if my definition of a woman doesn't fit your aesthetic. I am angry and tired of not being sweet enough for you. You see, women are taught to be warm and get scorned when we become cold and don't conform to the pretty girls in pink who sing instead of play sports. But this is for the women with a voice, for the women who aren't afraid to make noise. This is for the women who fight and still love. Society wants us to suffocate in turtlenecks and gender roles because mini skirts and bandeaus just aren't appropriate enough. They aren't passive enough. Women are expected to have a seat instead of lead. If I told you I had my PhD, you'd still underestimate me. Being a woman comes with so much. When we are abused, it's somehow still our fault for being in the way, for dressing that way, for being gay. When will you stop telling women what is or isn't ladylike? When will you stop telling women what to wear and how to act a matter of fact? Women are magic, not your thing you get psst at. So please don't touch her. Please don't touch me. You're not entitled to a yes, and the answer is still no. To whom it may concern, your expectations of a woman and reality do not match, and it's not my fault you can't handle that. You're the problem, not women. Thank you. This next piece is one of my favorite poems. It just means so much to me, and I always really enjoy reading it. So I just want to, again, thank you for having me in this space and being able to share with all of you. This piece is called Summers Got Darker. I was born with color. Skin similar to a wet sand, not just a little dark tan. I was Black. I must admit, the sun fell in love with me, so summers got darker. And to some, that was a little too much. It was Black attack, it was darky. I was just not white or pretty or light enough. I wasn't worthy, I was dirty, my skin associated with stereotypes and whack notions, my Blackness being attacked more than sharks in an ocean. And they say things like, all Black people will ever know is poverty, drugs and hustling streets, forgetting that my hope stems from my ancestry. That my ancestors have fought way too hard for me to remain in these chains, that heroes aren't the Trumps and Jeff Sessions, they are Maya Angelou, MLK, and Luke Cage. This is for all the Black girls who wanted to bleach their skin in 6th grade, me too. I remember perm after perm damaging my Black roots. Imagine being in a school or job where no one looked like you, where beauty met a certain standard that you would never meet. As if English wasn't fit for my tongue, as if my skin screamed I'm not good enough. But I'm not sorry that your stereotypes don't fit and that I'm more than you think. I will not be anything less than unapologetically Black and carefree. I am proud of this rich, dark skin, the same skin the sun fell in love with. Doesn't it suck being so jealous? You thought ivory was beautiful until you met me. Intelligent, divine, and carefree. The sun had already declared my beauty. It does not see what you see. And I will not apologize for doing better. I will not apologize for excelling or following my dreams. You thought you'd keep us slaves forever, but I'm not what you expected me to be. The underestimates you have of me are none of my business. Proving you wrong is. Being me is. Being Black is. So you don't have to love my skin because I already think it's all that. And if you disagree, well, you can just kiss my Black. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
How do you follow that? Thank you. Thank you, Kiosha. Just, I think it's important that we talk about the lay of the land, the agenda for the day. On your tables, there are 2 sheets, one for the morning session and one for the afternoon session. On your name badges, on the left side there's a color, on the right side there's a color. The left color represents your morning session, which is going to correspond to the name of the session and the room number, and the right side is your afternoon session. This is the main hall, the Kingston room. So if you are here, you're going to stay here after the keynote. For the yellow and red rooms, you're going to be going upstairs, and after the keynote, you will have volunteers on each side of the doors to take you upstairs. And those are going to be the Hardwood and Salem rooms. There are 2 bathrooms on this floor, and there's 3 bathrooms on the upstairs floor, with the inclusion of a gender-neutral bathroom on the 3rd floor. I want to give a special thank you to the Hilton for the catering, for Jessica Reines being such a wonderful organizer and being so incredibly accommodating. We had a last-minute location change, and I want to thank you all for being so accommodating as well. So, without further ado, I want to start our first keynote of the morning. Please help me welcome Samantha Burdett, Policy Advisor for the Diversity and Immigration Program at the Region of Durham. Samantha is the Policy Advisor. She works with the local Diversity and Immigration Partnership Council in Durham. She's an experienced researcher with a keen interest in innovative forms of evaluation. Prior to working at the region, Samantha worked in the nonprofit sector as a policy and research analyst. She is also involved in information services at the region, and is also a university lecturer. She's a total data geek, trust me, she is. Sam is here to talk to you today about community, diversity, and her favorite topic, demographics. So she's going to set the stage. Please welcome Sam.
Good morning. We've had some technical difficulties, so I'm just going to make sure that Clive's got us all sorted out over there, because I can't see. I really can't see. Is it up yet? Okay, I'm going to count on May and Oliver to give me the heads up when we're... You're going to be so disappointed when you see my first slide. I apologize. It's not that exciting. Can we just go to the PowerPoint? I mean, to the PDF? All right. Well, again, thank you. I feel very fortunate to be here. I have been at the last 2 diversity conferences, and if you haven't been here before, you're in for a treat. They've always been absolutely amazing, both in terms of the presenters and just the fantastic mix of people who come to this event. So you're in for a fantastic day. I've been really fortunate to work in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion in Durham for the past 8 years. And I come to this work from a very strong commitment and a dedication to human rights and to social justice issues. And I also bring experience as an immigrant, as a child of immigrants, as a woman, as a lesbian, and someone who has lived and worked in a multitude of places around the globe. So this is very close to my heart, and so I'm really excited to talk to you today. Have we changed slides? Thank you. The town of Ajax really led the region in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They developed the first strategic plan specifically targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and it was released in June 2010. And as you well know, we're now in the 2nd iteration of Ajax's strat plan. Soon after Ajax did their first DACE plan, the region of Durham got the contract for the Durham Local Immigration Partnership, or as we like to call it locally, the LDIPSI, very catchy title. It's the Local Diversity and Immigration Partnership Council, and that's who I work with. And our mandate is to work with the broader community to create welcoming communities for newcomers and other diverse populations, and to embed the needs of all residents in the planning processes of our institutions, organizations, and agencies. And just to give you an idea of what's happened over the last 8 years, it's been a tremendous shift in this community. We really started off with just sort of the one municipality having a plan. Nobody else was really interested in engaging in the topic. And through the work of everybody in this room, and so many of you have been integral to this work, we're now seeing municipalities really pick up this topic and work with it, and we're seeing real change happening at the grassroots. The town of Whitby and the city of Pickering both had race relations committees in the early days, and in 2012, the town of Whitby formally created the Ethnocultural Diversity Advisory Committee as a committee of council. That's really important to remember at the political level. When it's a committee of council, that means real accountability back to the residents of the community and to the political processes. The city of Pickering doesn't currently have a committee per se, but diversity is firmly embedded in their cultural strategic plan. The city of Oshawa passed their first diversity and inclusion plan 1 year ago, and they've just hired a new staff person to lead that work. And I did see Monica, there she is, hello. So that's fantastic. So give her a shout out. She's doing fantastic work in Oshawa. And the municipality of Clarington has just launched its municipal diversity committee. It is a committee of council, which means that members of council sit on that committee, residents and staff are also on that committee. So fantastic work is being done around the region. When we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking about respect. We don't have to agree with everyone else's beliefs or their choices, but we do need to respect their right to hold them. This is the definition of diversity that our program uses. It's also, we've borrowed this from the DDSB. We think it really does encompass sort of all of us working together. Saying that it's about respect and talking about definitions, it's also important to recognize that in Canada, we have certain beliefs and values that are enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and in our Human Rights Code. And those always trump individuals' perceived rights and beliefs. That's an important thing to remember when we're having this conversation about diversity and about human rights. You can disagree personally with who a person wants to marry, but you cannot discriminate against them on that basis. This is one of my favorite quotes, and as Andichi says so simply and so elegantly here, none of us is a single story. Something that each of us holds some trait that makes us different from others, something that makes us distinct and diverse from others. And that same thing in another context is what binds us to other people. And I love that part of that what makes us human, because we are very complex beings. But that sort of, we all strive to be unique, we all strive to be individual, and at that very same time, we also want to belong. We want to be part of something, we want to be part of the whole, to be included. And that part of being human that creates those in-groups can also other others. And as humans, part of that othering is something called unconscious bias. And I just want to talk just quickly about that because I think it's important that we acknowledge that we have unconscious bias and that we sort of, name it, especially as we go forward today. Unconscious bias is as normal as breathing. It is part of being human. It's a survival mechanism, but it can be flawed. Unconscious bias is instinctively categorizing people and things without being aware of it. It's guided by past experience and exposure, and this is where those flaws come in. For those of you sort of my age in the crowd, when you think back to those sitcoms we watched in the 70s and 80s, yikes, all those stereotypes that have all been filed away in the backs of our minds, and they're now how we unconsciously make sense of the world. We now need to actively debunk those stereotypes, those single stories. To challenge those stereotypes, we all need to recognize that we each have unconscious bias. We need to educate ourselves, and that's what we're here to do today. We need to think critically, again, why we're here today. We need to challenge assumptions, and we need to challenge some of our traditions. And we need to practice empathy. Language is immensely powerful. It changes all the time, and it has history. There are some terms that are only used within groups. A lot of groups are reclaiming labels. Within my own community, I often refer to myself as queer. People within my community, for some of them, that is still a hurtful word that they do not want to hear. And it's not something that really people outside of the group should be using without permission of the people inside the group. Language changes. I often refer to people as Indigenous, and other people within that community prefer to be called Aboriginal or First Nations. And we need to just be respectful about the language that people want. We need to own it if we screw up, and you're gonna screw up because we're human, and that's okay. It's not about you. It's about respecting other people's choices and other people's definitions of who they are. And we also need to ask genuine questions. People know if you're being a jerk. They also know when you're asking genuine questions, and be free to ask genuine questions today as you go through the day. I think one of the really difficult things to wrap our heads around sometimes around language and use of language and changing terms and what is it okay to say is that sometimes intent can actually be irrelevant. We can still unintentionally, genuinely offend and hurt someone. We don't always get it right. We often say or do things by default, that unconscious bias coming in again. And you may not intend to hurt, but you may hurt. So again, it's something that you just need to consciously know may happen and apologize when it does. To you, it might not be a big deal to say, oh, that's so gay. But to the person whose kid may be coming out or who may be questioning their own sexuality, that's a kick in the gut every single time they hear it. And so we just need to think about what we're saying. We need to think about what we really mean by the use of those words. We need to learn to use different words, change our language, and you know what? It'll cost us absolutely nothing. Defensiveness and ego, though, can stop us from caring and can stop us from communicating. I work at regional headquarters, I work in government, and even within government, language is evolving, slowly change. Service Canada has issued a directive to all staff to adopt gender-neutral language in government services. So this is as simple as, instead of asking names of mother or father, use parent. Instead of saying husband or wife, use spouse. It's very simple when you actually start doing it, and just acknowledging that change is good and we can all do it. Okay, Clive, where are you? Get up there. We've got a delicate balancing act, like there's literally 4 machines back here that are gonna make this work. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to talk to you a lot today, and for those of you who know me, you know this is what I love. It's about demographics. We're going to talk about what makes our community, how diverse is Ajax and the region of Durham, and we're going to start off with a clip from StatsCan, and this is just a celebration of Canada that they put out when the census was launched. The census results were launched last year. And it's going to work. There we go. It's like an operating room back there. They're pulling out plugs and putting back in. And if I had it memorized, I'd tell it to you.
Or take the kids to a concert. Many all across Canada, every day, things are changing. Our population is increasing faster than it has in almost 50 years. Some of us were born here, and so were our parents and grandparents. We have strong connections to our land and history. And some of us chose to come here from other places, to find work, to chase a dream, to build a better life. Canadians now live and work in cities and urban areas. We work hard so that at the end of the day, we can play hard too. Go watch the game and cheer for the home team. See a play, or a movie, or take the kids to a concert. Many of us also live in rural settings. Some of us work on farms, growing food for tables at home and around the world. And we're doing it without increasing how much water we use. That's good news for our most precious natural resources and our environment. But we don't just grow things in Canada. We make things here too. Like cars, and parts for airplanes, and metals to build products here and abroad. But what binds us together is our shared values. Canadians know that access to health care is the greatest gift of all. And ours is a country where education matters. Where children have the opportunity to learn and grow. Where higher learning and research are valued and taken seriously. How do we know all this? Because behind every number, there's a person, a family, a relationship. Together, we write Canada's story.
Okay. Can you put it back to the PDF, to the Census 2016 slide, please? Next one? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so how many of you filled out your census in 2016? Hands up. Brilliant. I was so disappointed. My mom got the long form to fill out and I didn't. It was very disappointing. I like filling out surveys, so when I said I'm a data geek, I am such a data geek. So what happens in Canada, for those of you who are not as familiar with the census, is we basically ask everybody a ton of questions about themselves to get the big picture. Who are we as a nation? What do we do? Where do we work? How do we get to work? What do we spend our money on? What is sort of the makeup of the people who are resident in Canada? The thing with the census is that it's one day. It's a day in May, and that's when all the questions are asked. You either get the short form or you get the long form census. The long form census asks some of the more complicated questions, and from that sort of 25% sample, they then can sort of infer to the rest of the country. So what I'm going to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so is, the census information for Durham region and specifically for Ajax, to give you that big picture of who's in our community. And the reasons you need to know this is if you do any kind of programming, if you provide any kind of services, if you're interested in community engagement, you need to know who's here, you need to know what they're doing and how they're doing it to get them to get involved, to get them to get engaged into what we're doing. So in terms of population growth, between the two census periods, 2011, 2016, Durham grew by 6.2%. We are one of the fastest growing municipalities in Ontario. We are a place of growth in the sort of the big plan for population growth across Ontario. And Ajax is top of the list in terms of growth. Ajax grew by 9.2% between 2011 and 2016. You only have to drive sort of north of Taunton to see where the other areas of growth are. Clarington grew by 8.8% at that time as well. When we look at demographics, we often look at population growth and age groups within a community, and Durham's quite young. The average age is 39.6. That's actually quite young in terms of the whole province, but Ajax is even younger. The median age in Ajax is 37.4 years of age, and what also makes Ajax different from other municipalities within the region is that you have a higher percentage of youth than many of the municipalities. Just under 20% of people in Ajax are under the age of 14. And in terms of over the age of 65, Ajax has the smallest proportion of seniors in all of Durham region at 11%. But the thing to keep in mind is that's still substantially higher than the previous 10 years when it was 7.8%. The big story coming out of the last census was, for the first time ever in Canada, the percentage of seniors outnumbered the number of youth. And this is really important from a policy perspective. When you have more seniors in your community, that means that you've got more people taking out of the tax base than are putting in. That has real implications in terms of government services, what we can afford to provide as a country, as a community. At the local level, that comes down to things like questions around recreation and culture. When you look at these numbers for Ajax, where 11% of the population is over the age of 65, seniors programming will be important, but probably not as important as in Uxbridge and Scugog, where you can see that 1 in 5 people who live in the municipalities of Uxbridge and Scugog are over the age of 65. So that has a real impact on what the towns are able to do in terms of services and where they're putting their priorities. So that's, again, that big picture piece of how demographics actually affect what's going on. We are very lucky. We live in an affluent community. The average income in Durham is substantially higher than the Canadian average. In Ajax, the average income is substantially higher than even the Durham average community. There are pockets of poverty in Durham, though. When we look across the region, the percentage of people living below the poverty line is 6%. We're fortunate, that's lower than the provincial average, but it still translates to roughly 38,000 people living below the poverty line in Durham region. Only 9,000 of that are actually people who are on OW, who are on Ontario Works, which means that there are roughly 30,000 people living in Durham region who are the working poor. CDCD did a study in 2016 which looked at what constitutes a living wage for people in Durham. And by their calculations, a working couple with 2 young children would need to make $17 an hour, each of them working a 37.5-hour work week. So that's just to get yourself to the poverty line, just so you're slightly above the poverty line, $17 an hour. We know that the minimum wage in Ontario is frozen at $14 an hour. So that's where we get the working poor. You can work full-time at a job, you and your partner, and you would still be living below the poverty line. Some of you may be surprised to know that in terms of municipalities within Durham, the highest rates of poverty are in Ajax. 9.4% of the population of Ajax lives below the poverty line. Oshawa follows that at 8.8% of the population. A couple of other sort of interesting things that came out of the census, which again have implications for us working in community and working with community members. We're seeing a change in the makeup of Canadian households. For the first time ever, the highest proportion of households are one-person households at 28%. That's not single parent, that's one person. So again, this has ramifications in terms of house building, where people live, where people choose to live. In terms of lone parent households, the average is about 5.2% across Durham. In Ajax, that's 5.4%. So 5.4% of the population are lone parent households. The average household size across Durham is 2.8%, slightly higher than the Ontario average. For those of you who can sort of see this graphic, if you look in that bottom left-hand column, how many people in this room have sort of young adults living at home, or are young adults living at home? Well, you guys are never leaving, and your kids are never leaving. So according to Stats Canada, 35% of youth aged between 20 and 34 are living with their parents. In the Oshawa CMA, which is just, Ajax kind of falls between the Toronto CMA, but a full 50% of individuals aged between 20 and 34 in the Oshawa CMA are still living with their parents. Just saying. Again, implications for housing, or issues around affordability. You know, all of those things come out of census information that we get like this. For those of you who are interested in getting people to your events, who are interested in community engagement, how do you get people to come out to things? Obviously, you have a kick-ass diversity conference, but Knowing about commuting in Durham is also important. And when you look at these statistics, you can see how many people are spending an awful lot, a lot of their day commuting into Toronto. We know that that Durham has the highest commuting rates in the GTA. And as Bowmanville is expanded, or people are sort of, as the GO trains are expanding, that will increase. And that has implications in terms of when you're offering your services and when you're doing programming. See, I'm getting you all addicted to the census, aren't I? All the important information you can get in here. I'm going to talk a little bit about immigration, and you can see here the change in the 10-year period. We know that 2/3 of population growth is due to immigration. That's true in Durham, it's true in Ontario, and it's true across Canada. You can see that there is a substantial jump between 2006 and 2016, and I'm going to talk to you in a little bit more about the details for Ajax. I love this infographic. It's been around a few years now. Many of you will have seen this before if you've heard me talk before. But this is an infographic that the Conference Board of Canada put out. And I like it because it's simple and it tells the story well. Canada is a land of immigrants. It's a bit of a truism, but it's something that's important to remember. Whether it was you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, they came to Canada from somewhere else for the most part. Do you know what challenges they faced? Do you know what helped them to settle in Canada? This is a lot of the work that I do. It's a lot of the work that I do with a lot of your agencies and organizations, the welcome centers, the school boards, the police, the libraries. We're all working to create welcoming communities for newcomers and sort of help them on that settlement and integration journey. So why is immigration important to Canada? First and foremost, we're not having enough babies. The birth rate in Canada is 1.6. To just maintain your population, it needs to be at 2.1. So if we want to maintain a standard of living in Canada, we need to bring people in. 25% of Canada's population will be 65 by 2035. This means that 5 million Canadians will be retiring by 2035. I hope to be among those, and to do that, I need all of you to be working, because right now, the ratio of workers to retirees is 4.1, which means we can afford for people to retire. By 2035, if we don't bring in new people to work in our economy, that will be down to 2.1, and that's not sustainable. We know that immigrants boost trade between Canada and the rest of the world. I did some focus groups when we were developing our strat plan a few years ago. And one of the things that I found really interesting when we were talking to newcomers is that, yes, you know, they have their country of origin, where they came from. But so many of the people I was talking to at the welcome centers, yeah, they'd been born in Russia, but actually they'd also worked in Pakistan and Uzbekistan before they came to Canada. Those are ties, those are business ties, and those are cultural ties that they are bringing with them. All of those networks they're bringing with them to their jobs in Canada, which is really, really valuable if you're in a business that wants to expand internationally. We know diversity strengthens culture, spurs innovation, creativity with business. Study after study after study after study, and I'm happy to provide those resources if anyone wants them, will tell you that the more diverse a business is, the more innovative that business is, and the more competitive they are in the world stage. Again, 2/3 of population growth in Durham is due to immigration, and that is the same for all of Canada. By 2035, the Conference Board predicts that 100% of population growth will be due to immigration. So the Conference Board of Canada estimates that we need to accept 350,000 immigrants per year. That's roughly just under 1% of the population. So it's a bit of a scary number when you say 350,000, but I think when you put it in perspective, just under 1% of the population, it's a manageable number. The federal government, for the first time, has adopted a 3-year plan for immigration targets. For 2018, it's been 310,000. 2019, 330,000, and by 2020, they hope to bring in 340,000 skilled newcomers. Those numbers do not include refugee numbers. Those numbers remain quite low at about 25,000 refugees a year. And that's our sort of compassionate and humanitarian stream for bringing people to Canada. So let's look at the Ajax numbers specifically. When StatsCan looks at immigration, they kind of put everything into two buckets. Anybody not born in Canada is an immigrant. So I was not born in Canada. I am an immigrant in the census. So I am included in that big immigration number. When we talk about new immigrants, that's usually people who've arrived within the last 5 years. So in this instance, where these numbers are concerned, those would be people who arrived between 2011 and 2016. So you can see, especially when you look at those percentages, roughly 22% of the population of Canada is an immigrant. That jumps to 29% for all of Ontario. We average at about just under 24% for all of Durham, but a whopping 38.72% of the population of Ajax is an immigrant. So they could be like me, they've been here since they were small, educated here, or they could have arrived last week. When we look at where people are from, that's changing. And again, for new immigrants, when we look at the patterns of immigration, where are people coming from before they come to Durham? These are the top 10 countries for Durham. They're roughly the same for Ajax, but just in a slightly different order, and I'll give you those, sort of the Ajax ordered top 10. So the top source country for newcomers, again, within the 5 years coming to Ajax are India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Jamaica, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, China, the US, Bangladesh, the UK, and Nigeria. So that's the top 10 for Ajax. This is probably the question I get asked the most often is, well, what are the newcomer languages? What do we need to translate things into? For the most part, you don't really need to translate into anything. Google Translate, everybody's got it on their phone, and they're going to be way better at using Google Translate than you will be. So learn how to use it. It's brilliant if you're going on holiday, and it's brilliant if you're talking to people at a bus stop, in a coffee shop. It's a great tool to have. Again, StatsCan actually tracks two different things. They track other languages spoken and other languages spoken at home, other than English or French is the other. And I always like to talk about the languages spoken at home, because I think that really is an indicator of the newer arrivals. So people who are still speaking their home language in the home with their children. So for Ajax, again, it's just in a different order, but the top 10 languages spoken in the home in Ajax are Tamil, Urdu, Persian or Farsi, Tagalog, Mandarin, Arabic, Gujarati, Spanish, Punjabi, and Cantonese. So the big news coming out of the last census, especially for Durham, was the very high increase in people who identified as a visible minority in the census. And I just want to pause there to talk about that term. It's a really crappy term. It's a term that Stats Canada continues to use. Visible minority, we talk about racialized communities more often when we're talking about this in our own community, but I use that term because that's how people have self-identified in the census. So when we're talking about the census information, that's why I'm using this term. Another thing to remember is a visible minority does not equate with newcomer. People who may identify as a visible minority may have been here 16 generations. So just sort of those things to think about. But you can see that this is also, I think, one of the big indicators of the changing face, literally, of the community. When you look back to 2006, 16.8% of people living in Durham identified as a visible minority. That had jumped to over 27% 10 years later. That's a big jump. When you look across Durham region at the different municipalities, you can see that while all of them are changing, Ajax probably has changed the most. 56.3% of the population of Ajax, and again, here you will see the ridiculousness of the term, 56.3% of people identify as a visible minority, as racialized. Often I hear when I talk to people in the northern municipalities, oh, we're not diverse, we don't have any diversity here, which of course they do, but you can see the numbers in the north as well are changing quite dramatically, doubling and tripling. When we look at where people, how people identify in terms of their own ethnic racial makeup, the top three for Ajax, people sort of self-identifying, and again, this is self-identifying. Number 1, South Asian, 2, Black, and 3, Filipino would be the top 3. The Aboriginal population in Canada is the fastest growing population. It grew by a whopping 43.4% over a 10-year period. It's a young population. The average age is only 34. And in Durham region, and again, Aboriginal population is how the census defines. People self-identify as being of Aboriginal ancestry in the census. We're talking roughly 2% of the population, which is just over 12,000 people. That's about the same proportion across Durham as newcomers. So to sort of keep perspective on sort of the diversity within the community. In Ajax, the numbers are a bit lower. About just below 1% of the population identify as Indigenous in Ajax. We talk about Big D diversity a lot in my program. It's that sort of going back to that definition of diversity and what it means. And there are a couple of things that the census doesn't track, much to my chagrin, because I wish they did. It would be great. But they do not track sexual orientation. And most researchers put the number at a very conservative 10% of the population. It's likely higher. As stigma decreases, that number will increase. So we're talking roughly, if we say 10% of the population of Durham, that's 65,000 people. PFLAG has a really interesting way to look at these statistics as well. They go for a less conservative number. But if approximately 10% of the population identify as gay or lesbian, approximately 30% of the population identify as bisexual, and approximately 3 to 5% of the population identify as trans, you're actually talking about half of the population who care whether you are creating welcoming, positive spaces for the LGBTQ population when you think about them and their families. So that's important, I think, sort of a really good way of looking at all aspects of diversity when we're talking about this. The other thing that StatsCan doesn't track is looking at people living with a disability. And again, we're pulling numbers based on some other studies that were done. StatsCan did a study in 2012 across the country, and for Ontario, the number of people who said that they were living with a physical disability was about 15.4%. So if we look at that number for Durham, that's about 100,000 people who are living with a physical disability in our community. We know that number will increase as our population ages, which it is. And again, that number may be a bit on the low side. StatsCan only tracks religion every 10 years, so we have to actually base these numbers on the National Household Survey in 2011. And some of you may remember there was a bit of a kerfuffle in 2011 because we got rid of the long-form census and brought in something called the National Household Survey. It was quite flawed as a statistical tool, so we always hold any numbers from the 2011 National Household Survey a little lightly, but for this is all we have. So I wanted to share this with you. Just over 2/3, about 22.1 million people across Canada identify as Christian. Of that group, Catholics were the largest Christian religious group at 12.8 million people. Again, in 2011, about 7.2% of Canada's population reported affiliation with Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, and Buddhist religions. In Durham, that number is at about 6%. So about 6% of the population of Durham identified as being affiliated with those other world religions. The largest of these religions is Muslim. In Durham, that's at about 3%. So 3% of the population in Durham identifies as Muslim. About 1% of the population in Canada identifies as Jewish. And in addition, 65,000 people reported an affiliation with traditional Aboriginal spirituality. I was a little surprised that 23.9% of people said that they had no religious affiliation. I thought that number was low. I expected that number to be a bit higher. So it will be interesting to see. The next census will ask about religious affiliation, so it will be interesting to sort of see where the changes are, especially between 2001 and moving forward. Clive, you're up. So I've spent a lot of time putting us all in boxes and telling you how we're all so very different. And I want to just sort of end my presentation with a bit of a clip. This is actually from a Danish TV station, those of you who you've probably seen this before. But it's a great clip to remind us of that intersectionality and that single story again. And coming back to, we are not all just one thing. So you do have to watch the screen because there's a little bit in Danish with some subtitles, but I hope you enjoy it. And he's on the spot, going to have to make it work.
The high earners, those just getting by, those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
So that's it. Have a fantastic day. I know you're going to learn a lot and come away with brilliant ideas. So thank you.